Welcome, and thank you for joining us as we begin the chilling journey into one of the most perplexing and haunting mysteries of the 20th century. This is the eerie case of the Vatican girl, the disappearance of 15-year-old Emanuela Orlandi, whose vanishing has left the world gripped in suspense and her family searching for answers that have eluded them for over 40 years. Emanuela Orlandi was a typical 15-year-old girl, full of promise and hope, living in Vatican City, a place that many consider a beacon of peace and sanctuary. On June 22, 1983, she woke up like any other day. She had plans to attend a music lesson outside the Vatican, an innocent, everyday activity. It was a day that would mark the beginning of one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries in Italy's history. The streets of Rome were alive with the hustle of tourists and locals going about their daily lives, unaware that a young girl's world would be turned upside down in a matter of hours. Emanuela, a bright student with a love for music, left her family home inside Vatican City to attend a lesson at a nearby location. She spoke to her family before leaving, her intentions clear and her demeanor calm. Yet, when she failed to arrive at her music lesson, panic set in. Hours passed and then days, but there was no sign of Emanuela. The silence from the authorities was deafening. At first, the authorities thought little of it. She's just a runaway, they speculated. Maybe she had a fight with her parents. But as the hours stretched into days and there was still no trace of Emanuela, it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary case. Her family, particularly her brother Pietro Orlandi, was thrust into a desperate search for answers, but no one could provide them with the information they so desperately needed. The investigation began to spiral into confusion. At first, there were no clues, no witnesses, and no leads. The Vatican would have been the center of Emanuela's life, seemed to be keeping a quiet distance from the search, and as days turned into weeks, their silence began to raise more questions and answers. What was the Vatican hiding? Could have played a role in her disappearance? Or was there something darker at play? Pietro Orlandi, in particular, became the emotional voice of the Orlandi family, tirelessly campaigning for justice. But his demands for transparency met with cold indifference. The Vatican, though not directly obstructing the investigation, was a fortress of secrecy, its walls seemingly impenetrable. It became clear that something far more complex than a simple disappearance was unfolding. As time wore on, the theories grew darker and more convoluted. Was Emanuela's disappearance the result of a simple, tragic mistake, or had something more sinister been at play? Some suggested that she may have been a victim of a kidnapping gone wrong, or worse yet, an assassination attempt tied to the Vatican's political dealings. One theory that began to take hold was that the disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi was connected to the notorious Italian mafia, with its known ties to both the Vatican and the Italian government. Could the mafia have been behind her abduction? Perhaps she was caught in a dangerous game of power between these shadowy forces. The mafia, after all, was known for making high-profile disappearances to exert leverage, and it was no secret that the Vatican had its fair share of dealings with organized crime in the region. However, there were other theories, each more chilling than the last. Was the Vatican's refusal to cooperate in the investigation a sign that they were not merely bystanders, but active participants in her disappearance? As months passed with no real answers, suspicion turned toward the church itself. Was Emanuela's fate tied to something much larger, something hidden within the walls of the Vatican? Throughout the early stages of the investigation, there were no breakthroughs, no hints of where Emanuela might be. The silence from the Vatican and the unhelpful responses from Italian authorities only fueled the growing sense of unease. Emanuela's family, particularly Pietro, began to question the very institutions they had trusted. How could the Vatican, a place built on faith and truth, remain so silent in the face of such a tragedy? Her family's heartbreak was compounded by the deepening mystery, and as the days turned to months, the case grew colder. Every lead seemed to lead nowhere. The more the investigation was stifled, the more the public began to suspect that someone powerful was deliberately blocking the search. In the face of this daunting silence, the Vatican's complicity was questioned. Could it be that Emanuela's disappearance had something to do with the internal political struggles that plagued the Vatican? There were whispers about Vatican officials using Emanuela as leverage in some high-stakes game, perhaps even as a way to send a message to those who were seen as threats to the Church's power. The emotional toll on Emanuela's family was immense. Pietro Orlandi, her older brother, would become the figurehead of the fight for justice. He refused to accept the idea that his sister was lost forever. With each passing day, his search for answers grew more determined. But the Vatican remained silent. The family was left with nothing but pain and unanswered questions. What happened to Emanuela? Theory, suspicion, and uncertainty continued to mount. The Vatican, the mafia, and political intrigue all seemed to converge on the case, but no one could provide the answers Pietro and his family so desperately needed. The emotional conflict that unfolded within the Orlandi family is one of betrayal and grief. Their trust in the institutions that were supposed to protect them was shattered, and they were forced to navigate a system that seemed intent on keeping the truth hidden. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the case, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned as we reveal the shocking theories and political intrigue surrounding Emanuela's disappearance. When Emanuela Orlandi went missing, no one could have anticipated the floodgate of conspiracy theories that would soon follow. While her disappearance was tragic, it was a political and historical context of the time that set the stage for the emergence of some of the most disturbing theories. It was the early 1980s, a turbulent time for both the Vatican and Italy. Pope John Paul II had survived an assassination attempt just 2 years earlier, in 1981, and the Vatican was under intense scrutiny, with many questioning its role in both global and Italian politics. The 1980s were marked by significant political upheaval within the Vatican, where internal power struggles, conflicts over church doctrine, and financial corruption were bubbling beneath the surface. Against this backdrop, the disappearance of a young girl seemed like the tip of an iceberg that no one could yet see. Many began to speculate that Emanuela's disappearance was not just an isolated event, but a tragic consequence of larger geopolitical issues. Was she somehow caught in the crossfire of the Vatican's dealings with organized crime or political entities? The timing of her disappearance, not long after the Pope's assassination attempt, made this theory all the more plausible. Some believe that Emanuela had been taken as part of a political power struggle, either as leverage in Vatican dealings with Italian officials or, more shockingly, with the mafia. One of the most persistent and chilling theories surrounding Emanuela's disappearance is that she was abducted by the mafia. In 1983, Italy was plagued by organized crime, and the Vatican was rumored to have tangled relationships with these criminal syndicates, particularly in relation to money laundering and illegal financial activities. The mafia, with its vast networks and power, had ties to various sectors of Italian society, including those within the church itself. Some of the most disturbing theories suggested that Emanuela was kidnapped as part of a mafia operation aimed at pressuring the Vatican to take certain actions. The mafia, it was believed, may have kidnapped her to force the church to comply with their demands. The theory gained traction when investigators found connections between the mafia and high-ranking Vatican officials, who were allegedly involved in secret financial dealings. Could Emanuela's abduction have been a result of an effort to make the Vatican comply with the criminal underworld? Furthermore, some suggested that the mafia had been involved in the kidnapping of other high-profile individuals, which added credence to the theory. If the mafia had kidnapped someone as powerful as the Pope, the assassination attempt on John Paul II, it wasn't far-fetched to believe they could have done the same to Emanuela Orlandi, a mere teenager caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Despite years of investigation, this theory continued to fuel speculation, especially when evidence of mafia activity around the Vatican remained suspiciously scarce. However, the most unsettling theory of all was that the Vatican itself had been involved in Emanuela's disappearance. The Vatican, an institution built on a foundation of faith, secrecy, and power, had long been suspected of harboring secrets that could shake the world to its core. Could it be that Emanuela's disappearance was tied to something far more sinister within the Vatican's inner sanctum? The Church's refusal to cooperate fully with investigators, along with its secretive nature, only fueled suspicions that the Vatican had more to hide than it was willing to admit. What made the case so perplexing was not just the silence from the Vatican, but the bizarre and conflicting statements made by officials within the Church. While some claimed they were doing everything they could to help find Emanuela, others seemed to brush the case off as a trivial matter. This inconsistency led many to believe that the Vatican was deliberately stifling the investigation, perhaps to protect its own interests. For years, the Vatican failed to offer any solid leads or evidence. As the Orlandi family pushed for answers, they were met with stonewalling and vague answers from church officials. The Orlandi family, particularly Emanuela's brother Pietro, became increasingly frustrated with the Church's unwillingness to cooperate. Pietro himself confronted Pope John Paul II in a famous meeting, demanding that the Vatican reveal any information they had about Emanuela's fate. Yet, despite his emotional plea, there was no revelation, no new information. This refusal to help only fueled growing suspicions that the Vatican may have been involved in her disappearance, either directly or indirectly. Was Emanuela targeted because she knew something about the Vatican's internal dealings? Or was her abduction a twisted effort to send a message to those within the Church who might have been speaking out against its corruption? As the case grew colder and the Vatican's refusal to engage with the investigation became more apparent, the media stepped in to fill the vacuum. Public interest in the case soared, with newspapers and TV programs picking up on the theories and speculations surrounding Emanuela's disappearance. Media outlets quickly began to tie the case to broader political and criminal narratives, including the mafia, the Vatican's secret financial dealings, and international political tensions. These theories range from the idea that Emanuela was part of a larger Vatican cover-up to the possibility that her abduction was a tragic but ultimately random event. The coverage of the case helped raise public awareness, but it also deepened the mystery. Each new headline seemed to add more questions than answers. For Emanuela's family, this media frenzy brought both hope and pain. Hope, because the case was being discussed on a global stage, but pain, because it meant that their private tragedy was now part of a very public spectacle, with the world casting judgment on the institutions they had trusted. Hang in there, as we dive deeper into the personal toll this case has taken on Emanuela's family, particularly her brother Pietro, whose quest for justice has become a relentless crusade that has defined his life. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts. What do you think happened to Emanuela? Could the Vatican be involved in hiding the truth? Stay tuned. From the very beginning, Pietro Orlandi made it clear he would not stop until his sister was found. When Emanuela disappeared, Pietro was immediately thrust into the center of a public battle for the truth. As one of the central figures in the Orlandi family, he became the public face of the search. His resolve was ironclad, but the battle ahead would test him in ways he couldn't have predicted. Despite the initial lack of support from both the Vatican and local authorities, Pietro remained determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. His first steps involved pushing for an official investigation, speaking to the media, and reaching out to anyone who could provide him with information about his sister's whereabouts. But as weeks turned into months and the investigation stagnated, Pietro began to feel the weight of the Vatican's indifference. The more Pietro pushed, the more he encountered stonewalling, both from the Church and the Italian authorities. The Vatican's silence was particularly painful for him. After all, his sister's disappearance happened within the walls of the Vatican itself, and yet it appeared as though those in charge were unwilling to lift a finger to help. This is where the emotional conflict for Pietro began. He wanted to believe that the Vatican was simply inefficient or unable to find answers. But as time passed, the growing realization set in. The Vatican's silence might not be due to incompetence. It might be a deliberate act to protect something far darker. As he struggled with this reality, Pietro found himself torn between hope and despair. The longer he went without answers, the more difficult it became to hold onto his faith in the Church that had been part of his family's life for generations. One of the most poignant moments in Pietro's crusade for justice came in 2005, when he confronted Pope John Paul II in an effort to get answers. For years, He had sought answers from the church, but each time he hit a dead end. When Pope John Paul II was nearing the end of his papacy, Pietro took the bold step of directly confronting him. In an emotional meeting, Pietro asked the Pope for help in finding his sister. For Pietro, this was more than just a meeting with the head of the church. It was a plea for closure, for answers, and for justice. But what he received in return was far less than he hoped for. Pope John Paul II's response was vague and non-committal. He expressed sorrow for the family's plight, but did not provide any new information or leads about Emanuela's fate. This meeting served as a harsh turning point for Pietro. It became clear to him that the Vatican's silence wasn't just a matter of miscommunication or neglect. There was something the church wasn't willing to share. The emotional toll on Pietro was enormous. He had spent years looking for answers, but instead, he found himself face to face with a system of power that seemed intent on keeping its secrets hidden. The confrontation with the Pope left Pietro disillusioned, but it also solidified his resolve. If the Vatican wouldn't help, he would continue his search on his own, no matter the cost. As the years passed, the emotional toll of the search for Emanuela took its toll on the entire Orlandi family. Emanuela's parents, particularly her mother, struggled to hold on to hope. But as the case went cold and new leads failed to materialize, it became clear that the Orlandi family was not just fighting for Emanuela's return. They were fighting a system that seemed to have no intention of revealing the truth. Pietro, in particular, bore the brunt of this emotional burden. He became increasingly isolated as he poured every ounce of his energy into the search, alienating himself from his own family and suffering from the deep psychological weight of pursuing a case that had shown no signs of resolution. The toll was not just emotional, it was physical, too. Pietro's health began to deteriorate as the years wore on, and yet he remained as determined as ever to find out what had happened to his sister. The constant barrage of dead ends, contradictions, and lack of cooperation from the Vatican only fueled Pietro's anger. He had become a man on a mission, not just for justice, but for the truth that had been buried beneath layers of deceit and silence. The quest had become his life. But no matter how hard he searched, the truth remained elusive, despite the Vatican's refusal to provide any meaningful assistance. Pietro's voice was amplified by the media. As the case gained attention, public support for the Orlandi family grew. Protests, vigils, and public demonstrations were held, demanding that the Vatican open its doors to the investigation. This public outcry served as a form of pressure on the Vatican, forcing it to respond, albeit in vague and unsatisfying ways. Pietro's voice was heard across the world, but it was met with the same stonewalling from the Vatican and Italian authorities. Despite the growing call for justice, the investigation remained stuck in place. New theories and leads emerged, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. The Vatican's continued refusal to cooperate with the investigation added fuel to the growing belief that it was hiding something. The emotional weight of these years of struggle, coupled with the constant media scrutiny and the toll on his own health, eventually led Pietro to question the very system he had spent his life fighting against. Was he simply chasing shadows, or was there a deeper, more sinister truth that he would never uncover? As we reach the end of Part 3, we see a man, Pietro Orlandi, whose life has been defined by the search for his sister. His journey has been one of relentless determination, but it's also been a journey marked by deep pain, personal sacrifice, and emotional turmoil. His quest for justice has been fueled by love, but has also come at a great cost. Pietro's fight is a powerful reminder of the emotional and psychological toll that comes with seeking the truth when the forces at play are far too powerful to confront directly. His emotional and moral conflict has been a central theme throughout the case, and his search continues to this day, now spanning more than 4 decades. If you've been moved by Pietro's journey, like, comment, and subscribe to support the search for justice. Stay tuned as we uncover the latest developments and the unresolved questions that continue to haunt the case. For over 40 years, the disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi remained a cold case, with no new information or breakthroughs to shed light on the mystery. The initial investigation was plagued by secrecy, miscommunication, and a lack of transparency, especially from the Vatican. As we've seen in previous parts, the Church's refusal to cooperate only fueled suspicion and conspiracy theories about its involvement in her disappearance. Despite numerous theories about the mafia's involvement, a possible Vatican cover-up, and political intrigue, there was no concrete evidence linking any party to Emanuela's disappearance. The absence of answers led to mounting frustration for the Orlandi family, whose hopes of finding closure seemed to fade with each passing year. But as time went on, a shift occurred in the investigation. New leads began to surface, and the case was once again thrust into the public spotlight. The Vatican's role in this case has always been shrouded in secrecy. In 2005, Pietro Orlandi confronted Pope John Paul II directly, asking for the Vatican's assistance in solving the case, but the response was vague and unsatisfactory. This pattern of silence continued for decades, leading many to believe that the Vatican may have been hiding something far darker than anyone could have imagined. But why? Could it be that the Vatican had some involvement in the disappearance, either directly or indirectly? If so, what was it trying to cover up? Or was it simply that the Vatican was being as evasive and secretive as it often is with sensitive matters? The lack of transparency only fueled the conspiracy theories that continue to surround the case. However, the Vatican's silence was not indefinite. In recent years, especially as the case continued to gain traction in the media, there were moments when it seemed the Church might be on the verge of revealing something. In 2019, the Vatican finally allowed authorities to inspect several tombs in the Teutonic Cemetery near the Vatican, following new claims that Emanuela's body might have been hidden there. But after the exhumations, no new evidence was found, and the mystery deepened. Despite the many years of stagnation, the investigation into Emanuela's disappearance was not entirely without progress. New information, sometimes unsettling and sometimes just perplexing, began to surface in the 2010s and 2020s. In 2012, a shocking new lead emerged from an unexpected source, an anonymous phone call that claimed to have knowledge of Emanuela's abduction. The caller stated that Emanuela had been taken by a secretive group connected to the Vatican and the mafia, as part of an elaborate plot to use her as leverage. However, this lead turned out to be another dead end, leading only to more frustration for the Orlandi family. But there was another twist. In 2022, new documents were released that suggested a possible connection between Emanuela's case and the infamous kidnapping of Italian banker Aldo Moro, who had been abducted and killed by the Red Brigades in 1978. The new documents indicated that Emanuela's disappearance may have been linked to the broader political and ideological struggles of time. However, the exact details remain unclear, and the documents have only fueled more questions than answers. Despite the gaps in the investigation, Pietro Orlandi remained as determined as ever. As a new generation of journalists and investigators took an interest in the case, the Orlandi family found a renewed sense of hope. But after decades of searching, the question remained: could they ever find the answers they so desperately sought? One of the most enduring theories surrounding Emanuela's disappearance is the possibility of a Vatican cover-up. In a city where power, secrecy, and religion intertwine, could the Church have been hiding something? The mafia angle continues to be a popular theory, given the mafia's known ties to the Vatican and its ability to orchestrate high-profile kidnappings. However, no concrete evidence has ever linked either party to the crime, leaving the case in a murky gray area of suspicion and uncertainty. Another theory revolves around the political climate of the time. Could Emanuela's disappearance have been part of a larger political plot involving the Church, the Italian government, or foreign entities? Was she taken as a pawn in a game of power and influence, caught in the middle of international negotiations or hidden agendas? Despite the tantalizing possibilities, no definitive answers have been uncovered. The theory that Emanuela was taken by a group within the Vatican or linked to its financial dealings continues to persist. The Church's secrecy and its long history of cover-ups have led many to believe that Emanuela's disappearance was not random, but part of a larger, more sinister plan. However, despite years of investigating and countless hours of speculation, the truth remains elusive. Through it all, the emotional toll on the Orlandi family has been immeasurable. For decades, Pietro Orlandi has been the family's emotional and moral anchor, tirelessly fighting for justice for his sister. His journey has been a lonely one, marked by heartache, frustration, and moments of despair. His refusal to give up has inspired many, but has also come at a great personal cost. The emotional burden of the case has weighed heavily on Pietro's health. Years of stress, anxiety, and a constant push against powerful forces have taken their toll. Yet, despite his personal struggles, he has never wavered in his commitment to uncover the truth. His dedication has made him a symbol of hope for the family, but has also left him wondering whether he will ever find the answers he seeks. Emanuela's mother, who has been through unimaginable grief, still clings to the hope that her daughter might one day return, even though the chances grow slimmer with each passing year. The family has been broken by the years of unanswered questions, but their love for Emanuela continues to drive them forward. As we close this chapter on the eerie case of the Vatican girl, we are left with more questions than answers. Despite the new leads, the renewed interest in the case, and the tireless efforts of the Orlandi family, the mystery of what happened to Emanuela Orlandi remains unsolved. The Vatican's silence, the mafia's involvement, and the political intrigue all contribute to the ongoing uncertainty that shrouds this case. The Orlandi family's fight for justice is far from over. While there are glimmers of hope that new evidence may one day be uncovered, the path forward is fraught with obstacles. For now, the truth remains hidden, locked away in the walls of the Vatican, waiting to be revealed. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the eerie and tragic case of Emanuela Orlandi. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth investigations into true crime mysteries. Share your thoughts. What do you think happened to Emanuela? Could we finally see the truth revealed, or will this case remain a haunting mystery for years to come?